Mute.
Do. Good evening, everybody. We're meeting with Michael-Rooks, who is a curator from the fabulous High Museum in Atlanta. But he's in hiding in Hawaii at the moment. So, Michael, I like to start with, certain kinds of basic questions like, well, first of all, I think you and I have known each other, what, maybe 15 years, maybe 20?
Yeah, at least, going on 15 years.
I think that's probably about right. Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at a public high school in Ottawa, Illinois.
Ottawa?
Ottawa Township High School.
The thriving metropolis?
Ottawa.
And how far from Chicago is that?
That is 80 miles southeast.
Okay. And when you were in high school, did you have any inkling that you wanted to be an artist or involved in the arts in any way?
Yeah, I did, as a matter of fact.
Our
high school, wait, 80 miles? Anyway, it's 2 hours away.
Okay.
Our public high school, our Ottawa Township High School has an art collection. It's very unusual. And it was given to me, to the high school as a gift in the 30s or 40s by Wally Finley. Remember Wally Finley Galleries over by Water Tower?
In New York, yeah.
Yeah, in New York.
Why did he give it to the Ottawa High School?
At the time, it was a huge tax benefit. And there were, I think it was also a convenient place for him to park things until he found a client, and then he would swap them out while retaining the tax benefit just between all of us. That seemed to have happened frequently. Nevertheless, there was a great art collection there, so I was the docent. I was the tour guide for the art collection while I was in high school, and I also was the big art guy in high school. So.
Wow, okay, and then where did you go to college?
The Art Institute of Chicago for both undergrad and grad.
And what did you major in?
Undergrad, I was a painting major.
Yep.
And in grad school, I was enrolled in the, what program is that? The Masters for Modern Art History and Criticism.
And that was at the Art Institute also?
Yeah.
And then, all right, so you got out of there, and then what happened?
Well, I tried to be a painter, and that didn't quite work for me. So I got a job at the American Hospital Association, and then that I didn't quite like. I hated, as a matter of fact. And then so I opened a gallery, an antique shop up on the north side. And at the same time, I went back to school to get my MA at the Art Institute.
And you accomplished that?
I did. Did you ever come to my, probably not. It was in the 18th and 19th century decorative arts and antiques on Halstead and Cornelia, called Acme.
Maybe once, maybe not at all. I probably bopped in and out of a number of galleries, and I never associated, or antique shops, and I never associated that with you. I can remember a couple of others that were in that neighborhood. I might not have ever.
Well, it was a great experience for me because I learned about sort of the commercial side of what I do now. It was the very beginning of an understanding of how commercial art world works.
Right.
I showed not only did I sell antiques and decorative arts, but I also showed some artists' work in my space, like Phil Hansen, who's a great painter, and Susanna Coffey, and a number of other artists in Chicago. So I try to support their work and also sell antiques.
Cool. How did you segue from that into the museum world?
Well, I was at the same time getting my master's at the Art Institute, and my thesis advisor was Dennis Adrian. He was working on the Westerman show at the MCA and needed someone to work with him. I was the only person, I think, in Chicago who he felt he could work with because he's not an easy guy to work with. And ultimately, the museum hired me to be his research assistant at the MCA.
I kind of thought when you were his research assistant, you were pretty much already a curator.
No, I was a research assistant for a year at the MCA, and then what happened was within a year, the director left, and his
Who was that, Bruce Gunther then?
No, that was Kevin Concy.
Oh, Kevin, yeah, the former truck driver. Okay.
Yes, Kevin, the truck driver, left, and so did all of his curators. So there was a vacuum of power vacuum, if you will, and but also there's a lot to do and no one to do it. So the new director, Bob Fitzpatrick, moved in and promoted me to assistant curator, which is, you know, in hindsight, incredible move up and scary. And I took over the Westerman projects.
And then, so you were at the MCA, what, 10 years, at the full time that Bob was there?
No, I was there for 6 years. From
then you went to Hawaii for a bit, right?
Yeah, from 97 to 2003, and I moved to Hawaii in November of 2003. And I was here in Hawaii for 5 years, and then moved to New York to join Haunch of Venison, another commercial gallery owned by Christie's, to launch their gallery in New York. It's a London-based gallery. And Bob Fitzpatrick, who is the director at MCA, retired, joined Christie's to run the international operation for Haunch of Venison, and brought me in to launch the gallery.
And was that a good experience?
Hang on, Paul. You all got little circles.
Oh, I can still hear you though, and I can still see you. So maybe it's you who have an isolated problem. But yeah.
Okay, you can still hear me. Okay.
And your lips are still moving. So I want to know more about the Haunch of Venison experience. What was that like? Because that was a really huge, big, fabulous gallery, and I'm circling, and with a really solid reputation, expanding from their London base to New York. A highly commercial enterprise. How was that?
I think I understood your question, and it's about Haunch of Venison. Described it a bit. For me, I became disillusioned with the museum world at one point, working in a museum, so I went to Haunch of Venison, and the challenge was for me to launch this flagship gallery in New York, of a blue-chip gallery with deep pockets in a city that was very hostile to the idea of a gallery being owned by an auction house. And so moving into hostile territory, there was a big challenge to overcome the perception of a conflict of interest. At the same time, a challenge for building a stable of great artists from ground up, basically, because while the gallery was based in London, Zurich, and Berlin, almost every artist they wanted in New York had a gallery in New York, a great gallery, so we weren't going to be winning over new artists. So there was a lot of challenges that both Bob Fitzpatrick and I felt were exciting and, you know, worth a shot.
How long were you there?
I was there 1 year. We opened September 2008, just a week after Lehman Brothers collapsed, and needless to say, the entire commercial art world changed. And in about a year, Bob, our team, the founding team, was cut loose. We were downsized. The gallery's still around, and now they're in Chelsea.
Did you think you did an okay job?
Sorry?
Did you think you did a good job there, or did they, I mean, like, was it intended at the outset to be a year, or did they not appreciate the direction you guys were taking it, or what?
I can't really understand you, Paul. Do you think I can try logging out and logging back in? Because there's a bunch of circles still on everyone's face.
Go ahead, but I'm not. Go ahead.
Seem to be frozen.
I'll pause this. Go ahead.
Sorry, it might be me because it seems there's like a really gusty storm going on up here on top of this mountain.
Okay, fine. I'll part the clouds. So you were at Haunch of Venison for a year, and tell me why you were disillusioned with the art world or the museum world, and how you re-entered it.
Well, at the time, it was because the museum I was associated with was uninterested in contemporary art, and was also uninterested in supporting the local art scene.
Which museum are we talking about? Can we name names here?
The Honolulu Academy of Arts. It's a new museum now. They've actually changed the name to the Honolulu Museum of Art, but new director and everything. So in the last year. But yeah, no, that I was just made a lot of promises about what they wanted to see happen, and in fact, they weren't interested at all. So I decided to go to the dark side.
Yeah, you did. And okay, so I remember though I came there and saw the museum. I was really impressed with the Cornell exhibit that you had, which was there when I was there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, that was at the Contemporary Museum, and I was there.
Right, but weren't you involved in that, or didn't you, or not?
Oh, yeah, no, I was at the Contemporary Museum for 3.5 years, and I loved it. But you know, I had to leave that position because, again, a lot of stuff that I felt was antithetical to the choices I made to be a curator, and so I decided to leave that position, and then the Academy hired me as their European and American curator. So there was a long string of events. Let's say from this NCA Chicago, where I loved working and I loved the family there, from my last show there, which was a bit controversial, to my last position in Honolulu, I seem to have been let down often by the things I felt, the things I believed in about museums and working for a museum. So that's why I decided maybe I'd better be better off working at a gallery.
Which probably wasn't brilliant. Well, probably wasn't, you know, I mean, aren't you happier at the High Museum than many of these former situations?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
I mean, from what I can tell, you know, I'm not having anybody report to me about how you're doing in Atlanta, but from what I can see of art you're showing and installations you're showing, it looks pretty accessible, aggressive, fun, and like it's a vibrant scene, and you're making a difference there. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is. I think I'm really pleased with what I've been able to do in the last 2 years and 4 months. And we have a lot more to do.
Were you headhunted for that position?
I was.
And how, you know, on one hand, it seems to me like curators tend to move from one museum to another like every 3 years, and then there's another subsect of that who seem to stay at an institution for maybe 20 or several decades. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think it's important for contemporary art curators to not stick around so long. You know, to remain current, I think it's good to be in a new situation every 5-7 years. Other curators, say American or European curators, have their careers involve research and often academics. Often they're combined. Sometimes they'll teach at a university, do research, and prepare exhibitions for, you know, long lead times, 5-10 years out. Wow. So it's a lot different than working as a contemporary curator. So those folks tend to stick around for a long time, you know, decades.
Got it. That's a good distinction. How do you? What's your role? What is your job description?
My job description is change agent.
Change agent. Cool.
No, my job description is curator of modern and contemporary art. I'm also confused that I'm in Hawaii now. I feel like I'm back at my old job.
Yeah, I hear you. And do you have a fair amount of free reign?
No, I don't, but I do in some respects. I mean, the museum hired me to build bridges between the museum and the community, meaning artists in the community. There had been a lot of bad blood between the museum and artists for a long time, maybe decades. And I think in the last 2 years, that has largely been achieved. And I'm really pleased about that, and have started a project series at the museum for artists who are based in Atlanta, and have begun collecting their work, artists in Atlanta and in Georgia, but mainly Atlanta. And at the same time, the contemporary program that I'm doing that's has a larger scope in terms of geography is really welcomed by all my colleagues at the museum, including the director and the directors, plural, and the Woodruff Arts Center, which is the larger sort of umbrella organization. So I have a fair amount of freedom, but it's a big museum and it's a general museum, so there's other competing interests. It's kind of like James Rondo at the Art Institute must feel in some respects.
I get the feeling that James is fairly involved in fundraising. Are you?
Oh yeah.
So if you come up with an exhibit, do you have to legitimize it by funding it, or do you have to fund it? Let's screw the legitimizing part, but are you involved in funding a show you come up with?
It helps. Yeah. It not only helps, it is expected to some degree.
Does that steer your curating? I mean, do you anticipate exhibits or artists based on where you think money can come from?
No. But when I am thinking about exhibitions, I will at the same time be thinking about funding sources that are appropriate, whether they're grants or private individuals or corporations that might be interested. You know, there's a good fit for almost every type of funder out there, and I think it's just experience. It takes experience to understand and identify who those funders will be.
How many contemporary curators are at the High Museum?
Me.
That would be one big guy?
Yeah.
Far out. All right. And yeah. How many shows do you curate a year?
Oh boy. Well, I've curated about since I've been at the High Museum, I'm responsible for about 8 exhibitions.
Jesus, that's
about
4 a year.
Yeah, it's crazy, including the Venice Biennale. I did the American Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of Architecture in 2010, which was insane.
I would imagine. So how many weeks of vacation do you get a year?
I get not enough.
I'm sure. That's amazing. So yeah, and here you are in Hawaii, and we tracked you down. So I'm really appreciative that you're here. That's insane. All right, so you're involved with interacting with the Atlanta art community. How do you do that? How do artists get on you? Here's the question everybody wants to know, of course. How do artists get on your radar? You know, and specifically in Atlanta, how are you figuring out who to go see and who to integrate with and who to consider and then who to bring into the museum?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of questions. Well, my own personal style is such that I welcome people, I welcome emails, communication, phone calls to me, inviting me to things, to remind me what's going on, and that before I actually joined the High Museum, I friended a lot of people on Facebook in Atlanta, artists I knew about, their friends, faculty members at university programs and at SCAD. So I wanted to just send a signal that I was open to talk and meet people. And so that being established, I do welcome people contacting me, letting me know what's going on, and I go out and see exhibitions like I did in Chicago. You recall I brought Bob Fitzpatrick, the director of the museum, out.
I do remember that. That was really nice. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to us. But it was part of going out. You can't really know, what's happening in your backyard if you don't go out and play sometimes. So I like to do that. And artists whom I meet, if I find there is something interesting in the work that either either I find merit in or that connects or dovetails with what I'm doing at the museum, then I'll get to know them and do a studio visit and take it from there. There's a show up right now by an artist, Alejandro Aguilera, who lives in Atlanta, and that's how it worked with Alejandro. I saw his work in the back room of the gallery, Saltworks Gallery, and sought him out, and we got to know each other, and he's a brilliant draftsman. So we did the show that has been incredibly well received, and I bought 3 pieces for the museum.
That's sweet. What does it take for you to make a studio visit? I mean, it's not a cold call, or you don't go see somebody without an anticipation of what you're going to find there, correct?
Right. It's not a cold call. So I will have done some homework in advance, seeing their work in person at a gallery or in someone's home if they're not represented by a gallery, and asking around, just basically doing a little homework to get to know the artist and the work, to see if the person is serious, has been working for a while, or if the work that I'd seen that turned me on was, was something that was an anomaly. Sometimes that happens.
Sure.
And then we'll connect. But the biggest problem for me right now is time, because I've got so little time that I have to schedule visits out like months ahead. But
like this.
Yeah.
What about, you mentioned unrepresented artists. I get the feeling some curators dismiss or don't pay significant attention to artists who don't have a gallery. How many not represented artists do you deal with? Explore.
A lot. And a lot meaning those who are working in Atlanta, but there's others who work elsewhere, who are not represented at all. And they're great artists. In some cases, they're thinking about representation. They're taking their time. And in other cases, there are artists who are just out of school and don't know quite how to do it. Others whose galleries have closed and they're in between. So I tend to base my opinion and commit my time based on the work and the merits that of the work that I've seen.
Do you think that's typical of most curators? I think that makes you special. What do you think?
No, maybe you're right, but that's one thing that I take personal pleasure in, and there's so little, frankly, that gives me pleasure in my work anymore. Not to be a, sad sack, but that is the case. So, and I think probably it's just expedient for my colleagues to look at artists who are in programs in different galleries. They can go to a gallery and say, "Oh, I know this program really well. I trust it." It cuts out a lot of the kind of homework and investigating they have to do in advance.
Sort of going to art fairs. How do you feel about going to art fairs and what you see there, and how much of an expedient that is?
I hate art fairs, but I have to do it.
Everybody hates art fairs, I think.
I know. I hate them, but I have to do it because it's a way for me to do business. Really concentrated amount of business in a couple of days. Saves on travel. It's budget relieving, because everyone's going to New York or where what have you, Miami. And so it's a good way for me to meet artists, dealers, and do a little business in terms of acquisitions, maybe, or see new work.
Do you feel like the High Museum is acquiring more contemporary art, it sounds like it, than the other institutions you've been associated with?
Absolutely. We are on a roll. We've been acquiring a great deal.
That's pretty exciting. What's the price range of things that you're buying?
Between $50
yeah.
and $1.5 million.
It's a narrow range. That's pretty exciting. So you have an endowment for purchasing art?
No, I don't. So it's the same with exhibitions. I have to go and help find money to acquire these things.
Is there any creative kinds of financing? I mean, I understand that the Dallas Museum used to cooperate with collectors and pay 50% of the purchase price of works of art that would then hang in collectors' homes on the condition that it later be donated to the museum. You do anything like that?
No, that's really creative, I do admit, yeah. No. What I am doing is working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the gallery world, who I think I understand a little bit better now that I've done this. And I negotiate with them and make deals with them, whether it's terms, time to buy things, or price, or a combination of that.
A lot of museums have art that rarely, if ever, sees the light of day, you know, that it's always in storage, etc. Is that also true there?
It is. It is. However, everything that I've acquired, almost everything is on view, or has been on view since I've acquired it. So it's one of the sort of, not policies, but one of the rules of thumb, that if I'm going to spend the time and energy and the resources to acquire something from the museum, we need to show it and figure out where to show it. So that's part of the plan. So when I propose an acquisition, I propose the funding source, and I also present a plan. Where am I going to show it? For how long? How does it fit within the collection? The scope of the collection, etc. So everything that I've acquired in the last, or not everything, but many of the things I've acquired in the last 6 months are on view right now.
That's commendable. Cool. Does the director who's the director now?
Michael Shapiro.
Okay, I don't know him. But he also does fundraising?
Yeah. Oh, yes. A great deal.
That's what I would think. Okay.
Yeah, for exhibitions and acquisitions.
Hey, you guys, I'm going to let you guys ask some questions of Michael in a moment. You know, you can start thinking of questions and or putting your hand up, and we'll get to you momentarily. So do you think you're going to, so I'm, you think you're likely to stay there another couple of years and then move on to something different or bigger or better, or do you think you're too early to tell?
No, I'll be there for a couple of years at least, if not longer. I really love Atlanta, so we'll see. And I love working in the community. Really, it's been a great pleasure to get to know the artists and the dealers in town. There's a few dealers, but not so many. But to get to know them and to get to know the collectors in town, and there's a potential there that some cities like Chicago, there's not the same kind of potential, meaning for the museum to change. You know, we've changed a great deal in the last 2 years, and I can be part of that. In Chicago, I don't think, you know, we were part of a change. Bob Fitzpatrick, Francesco Bonami, Elizabeth, Dom, me, you know, I think we achieved a lot while we were there.
Agreed. I think Madeline Grinstein's done a good job of continuing to change. I'm pretty impressed with her. I'm impressed with what she's done. Atlanta's a southern town, right?
Yeah, not really. It is, but
no?
Yeah. It's like a corporate relocation town. And there's a lot of old Southern families still there. But it feels very, not that Southern to me.
Interesting. And don't African Americans constitute the majority of the city's population?
You're probably right. I can't say to be certain, but
is that reflected in your curatorial selections, choosing, decisions, thoughts?
It is, absolutely.
Are there African American curators at the museum?
There's not. That was my question before I joined. It's a good question, and it inferred in that question is does the program reflect the interests and needs of that constituency? So,
correct.
I'm very sensitive to it, and have tried to make that a very priority in the decisions I make.
So there, I don't know. So let's talk about purity or lack thereof. And I'm assuming that purity is a singular response to the art that has nothing to do with the male, female, religion, or heritage of the person that made it.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure that's pure, because now that I'm in Chicago, they're generating a new culture plan, and the notion is that people who are not in the city center want art in their communities, and they want art centers. And I suspect that it is unfair for white people of Northern European heritage to be passing judgment on art that reflects the African diaspora or, Hispanic tradition, because there's a different history of art that different cultures have. And I think the notion is that we should come to appreciate divergent cultures and not necessarily, and have a more open mind and not necessarily judge somebody with the narrow myopia that we bring to it, but something that says, your art is different, what's different about it, how do I relate to it? Where do you fall on that scale and within the museum?
Well,
that's tricky.
Complicated question, Paul.
Yes. Hey, you're a complicated guy. It's okay.
Oh, well, sometimes. So the first part of your question is about purity in terms of not letting decisions be unduly influenced by, these other things. And I like to think that the decisions I make are not impacted in a negative way because of whether it's a constituency I'm thinking about, or whether it's the museum's overarching sort of goals and programs, which are a big influence on what I do. So to try to address the other part of your question about basically me being curator from Northern European sort of heritage, actually from Kentucky, Hills of Kentucky, hillbilly. Addressing the interests and histories of other cultures, the African diaspora, of the Afro-Cuban diaspora, and other interests. I think that I try to keep an open mind and talk with colleagues and educate myself about what is relevant today, and how is it relevant to our museum context and to our community, our local community, and hope that I make the right decisions about whether it's exhibitions or acquisitions. But
is it interesting? Am I interrupting you?
No, I just think your initial question was right on. I mean, are there any African American curators at the museum? It's exactly the first question I asked when I was being recruited for the job, because I think it's important. And that there is not. I'm not sure, how to reconcile that, but I'm just very sensitive to it, given that, as you say, at least half, if not more than half of the population of the city of Atlanta is African American.
There's an interesting show here in town by Michael-Rooks Thomas that is titled Tête-à-Tête, that in my mind looks at how a non-dominant culture maintains its integrity and interfaces with a dominant culture. So this is a black woman. So the real question is how black artists maintain their cultural integrity, yet get their art absorbed and appreciated by a larger, in this case, white community. And, the population is shifting in the United States so that, white people may not be the dominant culture at some point in the future. And I think it's really interesting, and maybe it serves Atlanta to look at how one culture that isn't dominant interacts, etc. I didn't say that
Yeah,
very well.
and I think we've done that. You know, one of the other exhibitions that I did back last year, it's traveling right now, is an exhibition of Ratcliffe Bailey's work. And Ratcliffe Bailey went to the College of Art with Kara Walker. They were classmates, and they both addressed this question that you've posed in different ways, radically different ways, I think. And Ratcliffe's work tends, in his work, he tends to look at his heritage and also his history and the African diaspora in ways that are empowering, almost in a way that, don't laugh, but in Kehinde Wiley, a lot of his work is about empowerment. And for Ratcliffe, he incorporates personal biographical histories that are images, rather, and information that I think the local community really responds to incredibly well, because it sends a message that is a positivistic kind of message, and it is not it's not sort of dwelling on the sort of negative aspects of growing up in the South. And you know, Kara's work, you can imagine, addresses the kinds of histories and well, recent past in a way that's very confrontational, which I think we need to do more often in Atlanta as well.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere, yeah. But in Atlanta especially, I think we need to push the envelope a bit.
So have you increased your African American attendance in the past 24, 30 months?
Yes, we have. We for the Bailey show, for example, there were 80,000 people came to see that, and a good majority of them were African American, and
a majority.
Majority.
Beautiful.
I worked with the curator of the exhibition, Carol Thompson, and I worked with a guild. We put together a guild, we called it, of business leaders in the community, mainly African American business leaders, but everyone was welcome to participate. And it was about fundraising to pay for the show, but more importantly, it was about reaching out to people who perhaps the museum had not reached out to in the past, to let them know that they have stake in ownership. They can have ownership of our museum and our program through this exhibition and through subsequent exhibitions. So I think it worked out really well. And the Cause exhibition we have up now, the opening night, we had 3,000 people, and I'd never seen such a beautifully mixed crowd of young people in an opening before. I was so happy. The Asian American Latino, yeah.
I'm going to shift gears here and then take a question or two. The High Museum is part of the Woodruff Center. What's it like having a museum that is part of an entity that has other cultural activities that are not art related, that are not art? And how does that influence what the museum does?
It's complicated because there's 5 divisions of the Woodruff Art Center, and we don't really work together, and I think that's a lost opportunity. We're like a mini Lincoln Center in many ways, because the symphony is there, and we have 3 theaters and a youth program for youth. So we all kind of work in our own little bubble, and it's a little, frankly, dysfunctional. But I think we all recognize
coordination between them, and it's not like, I don't know, you do a show about Pinocchio and somebody, and they have a performance at at another entity.
That would be nice, but yeah, not yet. So we will see. I think we're working with. I'd love to work with the ASO or with one of the theaters. So
the ASO would be the symphony.
Right.
Okay. Cool. Karen, I'm getting to you. I see your hand, Karen. Go ahead and ask a question.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for doing this. I guess I was wondering, it sounded like something you said made it sound like you were buying pieces without kind of a bureaucratic discussion. And I'm wondering, at the museums, is there a lot of bureaucratic hierarchy and stuff to acquisition and deacquisition of pieces?
Yeah, the question was about bureaucracy in terms of acquisitions. Oh, there you are. Hi. Just looking for the volume. Yeah, there's just a lot of bureaucracy in any large organization, and maybe you're referring to the process of how I propose acquisitions.
Yeah.
I think while it might sound bureaucratic, I think that it is. It's a great exercise for me to be able to present a plan for how the museum, how a work fits within the scope of a collection, and how we plan to care for it and show it, and also how we plan to pay for it. And I think that I'm really pleased to be able to make the kinds of acquisitions I have, because we have this rigor in terms of acquisitions. On the other hand, in terms of selections, I'm given a pretty free rein in terms of what I'd like to acquire. I just have to make a case for it, like anyone you might have to do in terms of defending a thesis, right? I have to explain why it's important for us, because long after I'm gone, the work's going to be in the collection. So.
Is it easier to acquire than it is to deacquisition a piece?
I'm sorry?
Is it easier to acquire than it is to deacquisition a piece in a museum?
The correct term is deaccession, and the question, Michael, is it easier to acquire than to deaccession?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because it's really difficult to deaccession a work once it's acquired. It goes through a lot of hoops. So after I make the presentation and all, and successfully acquire a piece, meaning the committee votes yes, and the executive committee then ratifies that decision, it's really hard to deaccession it. And it's, plus which most museums have a policy about not deaccessioning work by living artists.
It kind of hurts their feelings.
It's not a good thing to do. Yeah.
Also, Karen, there's this interesting notion that's propelled by the American Museum Association that any time you deaccession a work of art, the proceeds from that sale must go to acquire new art and cannot be used, or other art, and cannot be used for funding general operating procedures, so that there are museums that have a really valuable collection, a huge portion of it, let's say 90%, that never gets exhibited, and they could sell off 40% of that and take care of themselves in perpetuity if they were only allowed to, or if the ethics, enabled that. And I don't know, you want to pass judgment on that, Michael?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great policy to have in place. And I went through a round of deaccessions my first year at the High Museum, which I think we'll be doing continuously, because it's part of caring for and managing a collection. It's sort of weeding things out. And sometimes those things are really strong works of art, but they just don't fit the scope of the collection any longer. And as Paul said, the funds you realize through the deaccession and sale of them go back into building the collection, so helping to shape it. There have been a number of incidents, well, maybe one spectacularly gross incident of a museum attempting to sell their work, right?
We're talking about the Rose Museum?
Yeah, the Rose Museum, to fund operations, basically. I don't know if probably the group may or may not know about the Rose Museum.
I bet half do and half don't. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But ultimately the Rose Museum backed down, and they were going to close and sell off the collection and use it to fund Brandeis University. and there was a big brouhaha, that's a nice word, and the museum said they'd ponder it for a while as they let most of their staff go, which gave them free voice to talk about what a terrible idea it was. And then ultimately, the Rose Museum decided to stay open and not proceed and do that heinous kind of activity. Let's move on. Patrick, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. My question is, so Michael, if you have an opportunity to purchase a work from an established artist, which is a mediocre painting, as opposed to an up-and-coming artist who is completely dynamic, which one would you pick and why?
I would pick the up-and-coming artist, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that one of the great things that I can still hang on to that I love about my job is the idea about connoisseurship, which is kind of a fuzzy idea, I guess. But it just implies that I know what I'm looking at, and if I feel it has merit, whether they're formal strengths or other qualities that merit acquisition by a museum, I want to go for it. But if something is sort of middling and is a second-rate example of an artist's work, I don't want to stick to the museum with that. I'd rather acquire something really strong by someone young who may or may not reach a certain, success in his or her career, but still we can help be part of that career.
Okay, one more question. When was the last time you painted? When was the last time you painted?
Last time I painted?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was in 1993. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, Michael.
A little louder if you can, Sharon.
Okay. Do you consider the archival quality of work when you purchase it?
Don't. I know it's bad. No, I don't consider the. No, that's not quite true. All right, yes, I do somewhat, but that's not really the top criteria for whether or not I select a work. Contemporary art conservation has to tackle a lot of different kinds of challenges that conventional conservators rather, have had to deal with. So I'll let them worry about how we, preserve a styrofoam sculpture with wax dripping over the top of it. And I know that it's, one thing that's interesting. It's a challenge for me to defend an acquisition proposal when it's made of material that is either fugitive or is very delicate, because my colleagues are dealing with paintings and sculptures made of oil paint on canvas and bronze or marble, etc. And so they challenge me and say, well, what's this going to look like in 50 years or 10 years? How are we going to preserve it? And they're good questions, but we can't limit our purview with contemporary art collecting to, archival issues. Does that answer your question?
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay.
Joyce, your turn. All right, you're unmuted.
Michael, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the kind of work that you're acquiring. Is it painting, sculpture, photography, or does it just depend on, when you see something that you really like?
I'm acquiring paintings, drawings, prints, sculpture, a lot of sculpture lately. I don't acquire photography because my colleague, Brett Abbott, is the curator of photography. So he and I are working together to bring in exciting young photographers to the collection, but I kind of defer to Brett with photography. The kind of work that I've been acquiring, it ranges because my title is Curator of Contemporary and Modern Art. I've acquired recently a wonderful sculpture by Earl Haig, and it's from the early 60s, and it's an abstract wooden sculpture. He's one of the few ab-ex sculptors, sort of first-generation abstract expressionist artist. So really wonderful thing. On the other hand, that same month I acquired a sculpture by Thomas Hausigo, and Thomas is a German artist based in Los Angeles, and his sculpture is the piece I acquired is on a plywood base with a bust sitting on top of it made of tough cow, which is sort of a synthetic plaster. And it refers to both Darth Vader and Picasso, a lot of great references. So if I were to assemble all the things I've acquired the last 2 years, they would really run a wide gamut of types of materials and types of objects.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, Javier, I'm going to let you ask your own question here. Go ahead, Javier.
Yeah. How do we, unknown artists, get to sell a work, a sculpture, to a curator like you or any other curator if we are known nowhere?
If you're known nowhere, how do you sell a work of art, basically? To a curator or to anybody?
To a museum curator like yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think that the ultimate goal should be to establish a relationship with a curator and get to know him or her, and then try to have an honest conversation to see if it's of interest, if your work is of interest to them. And I think if that person's willing to have that conversation, you know pretty soon whether or not that's a possibility. And then you can move on to whether it's another curator elsewhere, or that person may be willing to offer advice about what it is that they're looking for, or what it is in your work that perhaps they find interesting or not. But in my experience, I've had artists who send things into me cold. They wanting for me to consider an acquisition cold, and I really, it's hard for me to even take it seriously because I don't even have a relationship with that person or that object yet. I think what Paul and I were talking about earlier has a lot to do with it. Getting to know, establishing a relationship first with the community in order to kind of figure out what's a good fit and why it's a good fit.
I want you guys to notice that I didn't coach Michael to talk about building a relationship or being human to human and getting to know one another on a human people level, and that is a way that you can then ask them a question and or ask them to refer you to someone else. This is Michael totally independent of that, and I think almost all the people we talk to echo that same kind of thing. That it's one thing to make good art, but it's insufficient, and you've got to get your butt out there and get in the game and get involved and participate. So that, and another thing is, Javier, that I don't believe, and I don't suspect Michael does either, that you need to have a gallery in your hometown or that you need to show in your specific locale, but that the whole world is available to you and you need to find out what resonates with you and your art elsewhere and pursue those connections.
Absolutely.
All right. Would that relationship be? I live in a very small town in Texas, 2 hours away from Dallas would be the closest city. So would it be all right to look for that relationship via internet?
Certainly. It might be more difficult than doing it in person, and it might make sense to go to Dallas to go to an opening and figure out who the curator is, or to do some research beforehand and know who they are, and to be polite. But I don't think you should expect too much on the first visit besides a hearty handshake and say, "Hi, I'm Javier, a pleasure to meet you. I hope to come back soon and have another conversation with you at a later date." I don't think you should be too imposing and too pushy. It's the same thing when people want to meet you because you're a fabulous sculptor. You just don't want them coming after you and going, "Hey, Javier, what can you tell me so that I can be famous?" You want them to appreciate you and each other.
Okay.
I think that's right. I think even social media is really important too. I keep connected with a lot of people that I very rarely see through Facebook and also LinkedIn, other things. And I feel like I know them really well. And when I have met these people after a year or even longer, it seems like we have already made this connection, and it's easier to start talking about their work. So I think I just want to, you know.
So you have a number of people who come up to you, Michael, and say, "Hi, I'm your Facebook friend."
I've had, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, one guy who's a terrific artist, he's a street artist in Atlanta, I met through Facebook, and he went away to Korea on a trip. He had the chutzpah to go on his own. And came back after 8 months. I hadn't heard from him for a while, and got back in touch with me and said, "Hey, I'm back from Korea. I saw some cool things. Having a show at the skateboard shop." So I came by to see a show, and I bought a piece for our collection.
Time out, Javier. Michael-Rooks, the curator from the High Museum, went to a skateboard shop and purchased a work of art at the skateboard shop for the museum.
Yeah,
okay.
So,
now, if that doesn't give you permission to get your ass into a museum, you know, I don't know what does. You know, this is, you know, the world works in strange ways, and Michael's not that strange.
But yeah, this guy is an example of someone who doesn't have a gallery, is just out of school, literally a year and a half out of school. But is akamai, as we say in Hawaii here, has the smarts and gumption to connect and stay connected and to continue to develop a relationship. So anyway, I love the piece that we bought. I wish I could own it for myself.
That's really cool. Javier, I've muted you because you started sounding like a dog, or because I heard a dog barking. But I think that's really cool, and I really appreciate your question. And, you know, it's still a matter of developing relationships. And you can do it via Facebook, and you can do it like Michael said, but LinkedIn. I think doing it in person is more efficient, but, you know, if it doesn't work for you to go that distance all the time, there are other options. I think we've got time for one or two more questions if they're brief. Sandra, your turn. Go ahead.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I live in Georgia, and I'm glad you're here.
Oh, hi. Thanks.
I have two questions. One is, how did you come across the artist cause, the show Downtime?
Right.
And the other question is, are there plans for the museum to purchase a piece from Kara Walker?
Well, first question, cause. His name is Brian Donnelly. He actually sought me out because he's interested in the artist H.C. Westerman, and since my Chicago days, I've become somewhat of an expert on Westerman's work. So Brian sought me out. I am the expert, exactly. So anyway, Cause collects Westerman's work, and he's a really thoughtful young guy who incorporates a lot of references from Westerman rather, to Carl Worsom. He loves Chicago like so many people do now. Carl Worsom, Jim Nutt, and others. So we share a lot of interests and history. So that's how I met Brian. And the other question was, I'm sorry.
Kara Walker.
Kara Walker. Yeah. We own 2 sets of prints by Kara Walker, and I would love to acquire a major installation by her or a film, something else. We need to do that, and that's on my list of priorities.
Yeah, I agree.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sandra. Let's have the last question be Greg, if he can be quick and we can hear him. Good luck, Greg.
Thanks. I was wondering if the High Museum considers itself a regional gallery, and if so, what's the radius of where your influence spans?
Good question. We heard it. Well done.
Yeah. I think we do think of ourselves as a regional museum in that we serve the southeast region of the U.S. and with the largest venue for presenting art. And also as a general museum, meaning we have, you know, photography, contemporary, modern, European, American, decorative arts, African art. So it's important to us that we serve the entire region of the Southeast, and we take that seriously, meaning in the entire region, as many people as possible. And I feel like that might start to begin to sound like we're populist, that meaning we want to have as many heads through the door as possible, but I think there's a great value in doing that, a great cultural value, and it's a thing that we can contribute to our region.
So do you look as far away as Tupelo and Nashville and Tallahassee, or is that too far?
No, not at all. The radius that we serve would be, geez, literally the entire southeast region, all the way up to where?
Milwaukee.
Up till no, not up to Chicago, right? All the way down to Cuba. No, it's so it's hard for me to map it without having my stuff here, but I can tell you we slice and dice and gather information very methodically and scientifically, in fact, and so we know exactly where our audience is coming from in the Southeast. And we have a lot of people coming from Alabama, from the Carolinas, from Florida, and we know exactly what cities they're coming from too, which helps us to determine where to put billboards, stuff like that. At the same time, we're getting a great amount of people from all over the country and from Europe because of the relationships we have with museums in Scotland, in Paris, the Louvre, Scottish National Galleries, the Reina Sofia, MoMA at New York, and several other museums. We have long-term relationships with these museums, which is helping to build a reputation for the museum around the world, which is exciting. So while in the U.S. we might have this regional reputation, outside of the U.S. we have a very international reputation.
Fabulous. There are more questions, and we're going to have to take those up with Michael next time he visits. Michael, I think this has been really wonderful. I think you've shared a lot of really valuable information, and again, it proves, I think, to this audience that, you know, curators are in fact human beings and not just people who sit around on pedestals, and that, you know, you are accessible and you have the same kinds of thoughts and considerations that other humans do about, you know, what the right thing to do is about artwork and how you engage your audience, etc. I really appreciate you taking time out of the wet sunshine in Hawaii this afternoon to, you know, share this stuff with us. I think you've been really wonderful. I'm unmuting everybody so that I hope they all echo my sentiment. As everybody is now unmuted, Michael, thank you very, very much.
Right.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Aloha.
Very interesting.
Aloha, thank you.
Bye.
All right, I'm stopping the recording, gang. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.